evening. The gang is all assembled, ready to take a look at the news that's been making headlines over the last 7 days. Today, minus one person, but as we're quickly learning how to acquire and de-acquire accents, if there is such a word, Joe Ageo, one of our gang members here, is joining us from New York City in Midtown Manhattan. And maybe he'll get to speak to President Kinyara and then revert back with his accent. Okay, so Joe Ageo will be joining us live from New York City. He is traveling on work-related causes, but will still be joining us here to talk about a lot more. So here is what we have to discuss with you tonight, and we will make sure we incorporate your feedback, because that was your feedback last week. So don't worry, we'll have your tweets and your views scrolling at the bottom of your screen. We'll be talking about Maize. We'll be taking a look at what's happening at the EACC, a new person nominated at the helm of this Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. We will also be talking about those young boys who are still in custody. We don't know what charges yet, but that has caused quite a bit of uproar. And of course, the big topic regarding what's happening in Parliament. We have everyone here who understands those topics very well. Okay, so let's get straight into it. You probably just finished your plate of ugali right now, but what do you replace that with? Say, avocados. The heated and unusually political debate surrounding food came to a head on Newsnight here on Citizen TV this past Tuesday. Listen to what Senate Majority Leader had to say to Al Hussein Mohammed.
We're telling our farmers we cannot continue investing in maize because it's not going to give us the return we want. Let's go to high yield crops that we can plant 2-3 times a year. And you know, I've seen the debate out there, people saying, oh, you know, we must eat ugali, we must do this. Eating ugali and farming ugali are two different things.
Okay.
And he was not the only one. Member of Parliament Moses Kuria also had something to say about what you should be changing, why you should be changing your diet.
Especially from the media, every day maize, tomorrow maize, the other day maize. And my question is, for you to eat maize, ugali, you need something else. You need some stew of cabbages from Nyandarua. You need to mix it with some rice from where? You need some fish from Kisumu. Why are we not talking about all these others which go alongside maize?
So, diversify your diet. I'm sure that's something very foreign to you, Linus.
Very foreign indeed, very foreign indeed.
Milk,
and,
blood, that is all, and meat.
They may well advise us to leave that as well.
Yeah.
When we have problems with the drought,
there you go.
They'll say that we have to depart that. But that was a very, very interesting conversation and a very interesting week. Mm-hmm. And we keep talking about maize, but what we saw here, right on that table, mm-hmm. The encounter between Senate Majority Leader Murkomen Kipchumba and the Member of Parliament Joshua Kutuny. We talk about maize, but we saw a lot of spilling of beans right here on the set, because they had a lot of things to say. We should see this beyond maize, the crop. What I saw in that conversation is a lot of other factors, especially political factors. The rivalry playing out in the North Rift between the different political forces. And I see 2022 as a factor in there. We saw Kipchumba Murkomen consistently defending the deputy president from accusations by Kutuny, meaning then that they are not really concentrating just on the question and on the table, which is the plight of the farmers. There is also the 2022 factor. Some would say, even throw in the name of Senator Gideon Moi from the Rift Valley, and some have accused Kutuny of being an associate of the
right.
senator. So we should also see beyond the table, there is a lot of politics going on. But tragically, and which is why we call this a tragedy, there are farmers who are actually pained by what has happened there. And their pain is directed at the leaders of the Rift Valley, North Rift actually, North Rift, the bastion of maize farming. So what we're seeing there is, for lack of a better description, a case of a big party at the dinner table where then cannibalism erupts.
Indeed, and that is exactly what it was. But it's politics, and it's interesting how maize can be a political issue. I mean, but there's also this issue of pricing, and the price of it has also been a hot political button, hasn't it? I mean, you know, it's 2,300, 3,200, you know, who's making what money?
Yes, you're true. You're right, Yvonne. The 2,300 shillings price has caused uproar. Farmers are claiming that it's too low. You compare this to last year when we had to import maize because we had drought the previous year and the prices was at 3,200 shillings. That was quite high. And during that time, there was a lot that happened that still has a lot of question marks in terms of how could we have imported so much maize into the country. And it went beyond what had been budgeted for. We had budgeted about, I think if I'm not mistaken, 5.6 billion. But the maize that was brought into the country was 11.6 billion worth of maize.
Yeah.
Yes, of maize was brought into the country and they were put in the silos and all that. But farmers were not paid. We had instances of one farmer getting over, not even a farm, it's a supplier of maize,
right?
a trader who
Yeah.
got over 390 million shillings because they supplied a certain amount of maize to NCPB.
But is what they did illegal?
That's the question. There's an issue about
Yeah.
legality and
Yeah.
morality.
Yeah.
When Senate Majority Leader Kipchumba Murkomen was speaking about this issue,
Yeah.
he said there's nothing wrong legally with someone supplying all that. But you need to remember something, Yvonne, that according to NCPB regulations, farmers who are supposed to deliver maize to NCPB have to be vetted and registered. Okay, they have to be vetted and registered as farmers, and they're only allowed to farm, I think, 1,000 acres of land. So they're able to supply, I think, 3,000 bags of maize. But in this particular instance, hundreds of thousands of maize was delivered to NCPB. Now it raises questions about exactly who these traders are. Murkomen said that one of the traders who was mentioned collected maize from small farmers,
right,
and put them all together and supply to NCPB. Is this
can we
right?
talk about
Did they
that?
get
But
the money?
but isn't that just what happens in a free economy? I
Free
mean, it's a free market.
It's a free market,
Yeah.
one would argue.
Yeah.
But also the question of morality versus legality.
Right.
The context here that I see, and probably that's where the discussion should head, is was maize supplied to NCPB? If yes, who was paid, when? And who was not paid, why? Was there any influence? Because some of these big traders who supplied thousands of bags of maize to NCPB were paid, and a good chunk of the money that they expected. But small-scale farmers who queued for days on end had not been paid. So clearly, somebody pushed NCPB, pay so and so fast, don't pay so and so fast. And that is the question of morality.
So
But I think, sorry, just to add on to what Francis is saying, this is an ethical question. What farmers are raising is very simple. How about us? What about us? Because the role of government is to regulate. And also when you import maize like it was, you still have to take responsibility as a government for the maize that has been produced in the country.
Locally, okay.
You cannot run away from it and say, okay, farmers, it's a free economy, and we've brought in a lot of maize from Mexico. Keep yours in the
So what you're saying is the
granaries.
government has a duty towards its local farmers first.
It does.
Before traders.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I mean it's a moral, ethical, legal question. Joe, sitting in New York, this might be a bit of a foreign conversation for you right now. I don't know the last time you had ugali. But there's a moral question, an ethical question, a legal question, and now it turns out a political one.
Yes, Yvonne. I mean, of course, ugali cannot be alien. I mean, I have been eating it for quite a good part of my life, so there's a residual effect even when I'm in the city of New York. But I think more seriously, I want to piggyback a little bit on what Linus was talking about, which is the politics of this. And I think it speaks to a bigger context and trend that we've seen in the country many times, where there's a legitimate issue to be discussed, and yet it gets caught up in the politics of the day. For example, we've seen this happen with the Mau forest, for example, where there was a legitimate environmental question that was at play, but then you saw it being caught up in the politics of the elections. And I think we are increasingly seeing that now, even when we're talking about the issue of maize, where, as a matter of fact, you have farmers who have a problem, but then you see this becoming sort of the battlefield for the politicians who are vying for different things in the future. So at the end of the day, you find that the politicians are doing their game, which they are very good at doing, but the farmer keeps suffering. And I think that is a political trend in the country that keeps cropping up every time you have a big issue that needs to be discussed, and politics gets in the way. There are legitimate questions about maize. There are legitimate questions about the farmers who have not been paid. But I think there is an issue that was mentioned there about alternatives, which again will be dismissed in the politics of what is going on, because who is against who and whatever. But I think that it can't be that every year when there's a maize crisis, there is a food crisis in the country. I think there is, a point to be made about whether it is not time as a country for us to start thinking about the different alternatives that might exist out there, so that a maize crisis is not necessarily equivalent to a food crisis in Kenya. But for me, the bigger point here is, how is it that every time we have a legitimate national conversation going on, it is so easily conflated in the usual politics, and it gets lost in all the different arguments that politicians will keep bringing. And so we lose the issues in the process and focus on 2022, for instance, in this case, which is still 4 years away, and there are people who are suffering right now.
I think that's right. I mean, he's talked about, alternatives, but is alternatives the solution? I mean, is that the problem with maize farming right now? Because a lot of people are saying, if there is an ethical practice within NCPB, won't that same unethical practice be transferred to avocados, or if we decide to eat strawberries, or if we decide to eat sorghum or millet? I mean, aren't there fundamental issues that we need to sort of look into? Otherwise, we're just transferring this problem from maize to the next crop that we choose to do. Because I was speaking to Dr. James Nyoro, and he's one of the foremost minds on food security in this country, and he said it's not as easy as we think to change alternatives. I mean, I would like to challenge Linus to
stop drinking
milk and blood and meat, and maybe go into, I don't know, cucumbers.
I think the suggestion to change the crop is actually responsible, because it's first of all escapist. You are trying to run away from the issue. The issue here is how Kenya's leading crop, maize, which a lot of people in this country, the bulk of the population relies on for food and for income, is suddenly finding itself in very serious
and
problems.
Linus, you see a trend: tea, coffee,
Sugar.
cashew nuts, sugar. See how we're behaving with all of these crops. If we just keep moving cotton from one to the next.
As I keep
Isn't there a
saying,
trend
every time there's a crisis of this situation, somebody is benefiting from it. Create a crisis, cause anger among farmers, tell them resort to other crops, alternatives, and then you'll create a crisis, and then that gives you an opportunity to bring into the country some maize. So basically, I think even for us in the media, what we should be focusing actually is on what ails the agriculture sector in our country.
Okay, and the welfare of it.
That's the focus.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to cut you off, because we really need to see the conversation that was had about the welfare of farmers, which is, a big one. And this was what it came down to on Newsnight. If you missed it, here is Murkomen versus Kutunya. I feel like we need the boxing. Ding, ding.
And the bell, yeah.
I want to tell Murkomen that it is very unfortunate that farmers are suffering, and you are here defending the cartel. It is very unfortunate, Murkomen.
What are you talking about?
Murkomen, it is very unfortunate that you can claim that we cannot find market for our produce, yet for the maize from Mexico, it is being bought here
at a cheaper price,
3,600. Then you buy for the farmers at 2,300.
Whoa. Yvonne, when I listen to them speak about all this and the maize and the hula baloo and everything that caused it, I'll take you to something else that upsets me about this whole thing, is the fact that this maize that is causing all these chaos is in silos and it's going bad. According to Minister Kinjuri, 63% of the maize in the silos is not fit for human consumption because of the conditions under which they have been kept.
That was a KEBS report. KEBS report,
yes, and that was mentioned. And you look at how this maize is being kept. The silos in this country are as old as 40 years old. In fact, the newest one is in Maize Bridge, and it was built in 1992. So the maize is kept there, and when you it's supposed to only stay for about 6 months,
yeah.
and they stay for longer.
Yeah.
And what is amazing is from a story that was done by our own Sam Gituku, is that the lady who can test this maize to see whether it has aflatoxin, whether it's fit for human. There's only one lady who can do it for all the maize that we have in this country. She's based at the labs in Donholm. What does that tell you? And the fact that now we are going to get more maize, I think 2 million bags. What's going to happen? We'll still have the same situation where we get maize and we don't keep them in good conditions. Yeah, and in Arabica.
But even the 2 million bags that the country wants to buy, the question of the price. Because farmers are saying it costs them 2,710 shillings to produce a 90 kg bag of maize. I have a problem with that figure. Because when you speak to a few other people, they tell you it will cost between 1,500 and 1,650 to produce that one bag of maize. So even the 2,300 shillings that the government is offering makes sense. There's a profit. But who is this behind the farmers telling them refuse this 2,300 shillings price and agitate for 3,600 shillings? So if the government says we have no other money, 2,300 shillings it is. That farmer who took a loan, spent the money in farming, and has those bags of maize in his or her stores, what do? January is coming, they have to pay school fees for their children. So the problem is not the price, it's not anything else. The problem is the politics of maize. And this politics is not just about maize. It has very many other hidden hands.
Is the problem also the man at the helm? He's been publicly admonished 3 times. I think once was in mother tongue.
In public.
In public.
That's my problem. In public.
This is my take on the 2 times or 3 times now we have seen President Kenyatta taking on his cabinet minister, cabinet secretary in charge of agriculture, Mwangi Kiunjuri. I think the president has appreciated the full picture of the tragedy in the North Rift. The ethical questions around the payment of traders and not farmers who have toiled to actually bring the crop to the NCPB. I think he has appreciated the depth of the corruption in the maize sector. So when you see him there frustrated with Mwangi Kiunjuri, I even doubt he's addressing Mwangi Kiunjuri.
Who is he addressing?
I doubt he's addressing Mwangi Kiunjuri because this is his cabinet secretary. He knows where to find him. Like Joe would say, he knows where Kiunjuri lives. So does he have to wait for the ASK International show at Nairobi ground to actually address him? I think what we are seeing with that anger, this is the president's moment of, guy,
I know.
is this happening?
Is this happening?
Yes.
And I guess that is the same sort of thing we had here on Newsnight. Guy, is this happening?
Exactly.
With 2 MPs from one region or 2 members of parliament going at it. But then the same thing was also happening, within the precincts of the National Assembly.
Absolutely. And I told you last week
You
that
did.
they will not get the numbers.
No.
And they
You
weren't
did.
going to get the numbers. Clearly they wouldn't. Why? Because even the lobbying that was being done, there was a lot of ukora and uongo behind it. Because on one hand, you hear members of parliament say, we are supporting the gender bill. But behind the scenes, they are saying, hakuna kitu kama hiyo. In fact, nobody captured it better than Maison Leshomo, the woman rep from Samburu County. Take a look.
Ile sura umetuonesha ni mbili. Kuna sura ya raha anatupatia meno na ndani ya roho hatujui kama wako na sisi.
Joe, I don't know whether you followed the discussion from New York City. Did it surprise you?
Well, I did in bits and pieces, but I think what is more interesting is that you remember before I left on Monday night, I had this panel of several ladies there who included members of parliament, and interestingly, a lot of them were optimistic that this was going to pass. But it doesn't surprise me quite any one bit, because remember, this has happened many times before. We have very many undercurrents going on around this thing. And there are also people who had genuine concerns with that bill, actually, because first of all, I'm not too sure, of course, that drove the vote or as I like to say that these days these MPs have learned of how to reject votes by not showing up. But I think that there were two flaws that many of the analysts that I've been speaking to pointed out. One, of course, the fact that it actually further sought to defer this thing to 2022, because whatever it is that they were going to agree was never going to be implemented in the 12th Parliament. It was going to wait for the next general election for us to apply this formula. But secondly, also that even if we had seen this thing pass, then it will not have addressed the issue at hand. It will not have met the 2/3. I know there was this whole convoluted mathematics about elected seats versus nominations and everything. But in the total picture of the House, it was still not going to do that. But it just speaks to me about political will. I really think that if the political leaders, the president, for instance, the ex-prime minister, and all these other party leaders really wanted this thing to pass, I think there's a way that they could lobby the MPs to do that. And most of these women MPs know that. They'll tell you that quietly, but because at the end of the day they have loyalties to their parties, many of them don't want to admit that. But I really think that this is an issue that we should have sorted out. If we are not able, why don't we just say, well, this thing is not good for us, we don't want it, and get it out of the Constitution? Because as long as the law is in the Constitution, it is only responsible that all the players, all the political leaders, and whoever it is, work towards ensuring that it's done. But I think that
exactly.
there was a
So
point
clearly, Jamila,
most of these people lost the plot.
Clearly, Jamila, what happened yesterday was pushing the debate to February next year, pushing that decision whether to bury the gender bill or to cremate it.
That's a good point, Gashuri. In fact, in my head, I was thinking this is just postponing the inevitable, if you ask me. Because pushing it to February, expecting that somehow people's opinion will change, and maybe when it's brought they'll have a different outcome. It's like, what do they say? Unatarajia matokeo mengine na swali ni lile lile. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're not going to do that anymore. I think Joe has a point when he says that maybe we should look at something else. I'm a woman, and I would love more than anything to have more numbers in the House and in all these positions of leadership. But I think we are not going about it the right way with this particular bill. Please, women, don't crucify me in Kenya, because the other issue
news it's about to blow up.
It's about to blow up. But the other thing is, Yvonne, when you listen around to people and even Mashinani and all, this is not important to them.
Exactly.
It's not an important issue. Yeah. If
the tweet, I told you about the tweet just when I was doing the explainer a short while ago, and somebody said, stop harping on about that bill. It's dead. It's finished. Move on.
Actually,
this is a conversation.
I want to throw this. A friend of mine told me that this is a discussion for us in the media and in WhatsApp groups. It's not existing in Mashinani.
Neither is it existing in Parliament.
Does it, Linus?
That's very true. I think this is a conversation, and quite honestly, the country would rather not have. And this is what is informing the attitudes around this bill. Does it resonate countrywide? Because even these members of Parliament, in the parliamentary process, there is a time they convert themselves to a committee of the whole House.
Yes.
Yesterday, by postponing it to February, they converted themselves to pallbearers of the whole House, basically. That's what they'll do between now and February. Carry it safely to its destination, whether it's cremation or burial. It's not passing. We are having a dishonest conversation. It's not going anywhere. Don't expect anything from those members of Parliament. And ask the question also among the public, so that we don't just blame members of Parliament. Is this really a conversation that the public would rather have or not? And they're raising very serious questions about, okay, you want to increase members of Parliament. How are those ones that are in the House already doing? To them, even if you are bringing in one more MP for free, it's still a burden.
Article 81 of the Constitution requires that at least 2/3 of either gender should not occupy elective seats. Can I give you a hint? There's a bill that is being worked on to scrap that Article 81B. And because it's a constitutional bill, it's an amendment to the Constitution, but it can be done through a parliamentary initiative. So you only need 233 members in the National Assembly to scrap it.
Can we bet?
Bet you they'll be there.
Believe you me, the numbers will be available to scrap it.
Even more than the 233. Listen, I just want to talk about this though a little bit, because it's becoming a very difficult conversation to have even on social media. You try to use the word affirmative action. It's a dirty word. Nobody, even women, being identified as feminists. But why is it such a dirty word when we have so many obvious beneficiaries of affirmative action? President Uhuru Kenyatta came through Parliament through a nomination. By the way, President Moi did, the former President Moi. If you recall, how did we get into LegCo?
Affirmative action.
It was
for the
affirmative
black
action.
man.
It was for the Africans
Yes.
who would then come in. That was the only way they were going to get representation during the colonial times. This was in the late 1950s. So this is not exactly something that has not happened. In fact, the 12 nomination seats we have now were preceded by the 8 nomination seats into LegCo. But here we act like, oh, you know what, waende wapiganie debe. Maybe that's the conversation we should have been having then.
But Yvonne, I speak of the dishonesty surrounding this conversation, because had the Section 81 not been in existence, will we have been having this conversation?
Not at all.
Will there have been a crisis of representation on the gender space if that article was not in place? I don't think so. We are trying to just abide by the written constitution. But then now that is clashing, like I said last time, it's clashing with what we really believe in the hearts of hearts. What Leshomo was saying. So I think the route that Gashuri has just reported here is what we will see next. MPs in a very organized way, getting together, bipartisan, and getting rid of Article 81, I think it's B.
Of the Constitution.
Yes.
And there's something else our members of Parliament want to get rid of. You see, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission is the body mandated to review and set salaries and other perks for all public and state officers. But you know what? Our members of Parliament are discussing a bill that they are saying SRC does not understand their situation. So they want to take that function specifically for Parliament and allow the Parliamentary Service Commission to decide on the remuneration for members of Parliament. Clearly, this one, they will get more than the numbers.
Oh yeah.
Believe you
Men
me.
and women. But now, Joe, the person whom I would like to actually dictate my salary to. Take notice.
But I wanted to say something actually.
Yes, Joe.
I wanted to say something that Yvonne mentioned about this whole thing of nomination, affirmative action, and all of that. I think one of the bigger issues that most people I speak to raise about this is that for affirmative action to make sense, people have to not only be disadvantaged, but they also have to appear disadvantaged. And I think that one of the questions that people raise is, for example, when these seats are available, who gets nominated, who gets the positions? Are there people really who cannot go out there and fight for themselves and get all those seats? So if you think about the number of women who have been nominated, there are few, 1 or 2, you could say, well, maybe they wouldn't do that. But a lot of them, many people say, well, these are people who are able-bodied, they are strong, they have money, they are well-educated, and that sort of thing. So then that gives affirmative action a dirty face, because at the end of the day, you want to be sure that you're giving a free pass, as it were, to someone who is clearly disadvantaged. And I think that is one question that we'll have to deal with as we talk about what's the place of affirmative action, and whether, in fact, going forward, this is something that you can use, for example, to sell the gender bill, if indeed it's still in existence by the time we're discussing this again.
Jamila,
yes.
The chairman of the Parliamentary Service Commission is the Speaker of the National Assembly. And that commission has several members of Parliament representing their colleagues. Imagine a situation where they want hiked salaries. Do you think such a proposal would collapse at that point?
No. It's like what? Getting inviting mbuzis to dinners na kuna hyenas wamekaa hapo hivyo mnaambia mbuzi
and they're being invited by
and
the
invited exactly and it's really, it doesn't
for a sleepover.
Wakuje. It doesn't make any sense, Gashuri, when you say that, because I was looking through some of the provisions in this bill, and one of them just caught my eyes. It is ridiculous. Apparently, in the course of preparing this report by the committee, it visited US, UK, Northern Ireland, New Zealand, and India. And among the improvements they're asking for are, here you go, and I'm not making this up, bigger teapots, a better bar, 5-star chefs, and new bidets, toilets.
What
in the
is a
toilets.
bidet?
Ni choo
Jamila,
yenye iko na
you know
pengine
your-
remote
what
control,
is a
hapa
bidet?
kuna button unafinya hapa hivi kwa choo, and
And
then
then
maji yanajitokeza. So
You are
those are
hydrated.
exactly, those are some of the things that are in this report that Parliament wants to implement. So it's really ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous, but it is contained in this report.
But you see, Linus, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission was put there to regulate and review salaries for all state and public officers. What will stop the judiciary that has the Judicial Service Commission saying also, you guys don't understand how judges operate, so allow us to set
But
paths
teachers
for
have
them."
been saying that.
And Teachers Service Commission,
Yes.
Nurses have been saying that.
everybody.
It
So
will,
it
will
will be a
open
free
the
fall.
floodgates.
Yeah.
It will open the floodgates for everybody to demand for a better deal, because two things come out in this new proposal. First of all, this is not the first time that Parliament has demonstrated the ability to actually walk away from the national conscience, especially when it comes to the issues of remuneration. We are seeing greed and gluttony, and that is what feeds our politics. If you look at members of Parliament, if you look at politicians, how come their names would appear in things like the Maize situation? If it's a scandal, there'll be a politician. And apart from that, now they try and do crazy proposals to take their packs so high. The last report done by the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, this is a UK-based report, organization, listed Kenyan MPs as the second highest paid in the world. That's not something to be proud of. How do we measure against the country's GDP? These people actually, if they are allowed to get their way, will be a new royal class, basically, in a society of poor people. But this is really tragic, because 4 out of 5 highest paid MPs in the world are African. I think gluttony, greed, is just feeding our politics.
Right.
But let me be the devil's advocate a little bit.
We need to take a break.
Our members of Parliament
quickly.
will also argue
Yeah.
that it is us, it is the citizenry who make them want more, because you invite them for harambes, you want them to pay your bills, so they need something to give you, so you'll also feed off.
All right, so looks like we will have to pay our bills as well. But here's what we're doing. I think we'll create this as our SRC, our
Yes.
little PSC.
Yes.
Joe, by the time you come back from New York, there will be new proposals on your table. And they will be very good. So thank you. We have to leave it at that with you for now. But just be prepared for when you come back to the country. There will be something good on your table, for us at least. Joe Ageo joining us here on The Gang, live from New York City. We will see you next week. Be sure to come back with a twang.
Your space is here, right here.
That from Manhattan.
All right. Great. And on that note, let's take a break. We'll be right back.